we are in the midst of a digital business revolution, and that begins with IoT, that begins with data, that begins with machine learning, that begins with cloud.
What's coming in the next 10 years is the deepest technology and cultural shifts we've seen since the 1970s.
IoT may be one of the drivers, but I would say mobile broadband is possibly more likely to be.
The way in which IoT influences the development of 5G, well, it's top priority for just about every carrier, every vendor in the world at the moment.
Maybe as a driver, yeah, but I think it'll be a user of NFV, and it just makes sense. And you know, the concept of network slicing is dedicated virtual networks for specific applications or geographies.
So we would expect that a lot of it is about services. The question is really who provides what bit into the service.
We have a use case on IoT, so there are definitely use cases for NFV and IoT outside of 5G and within 5G.
I look at it as being a user of NFV technology, along with all the other applications that you could slice a core network into doing.
I mean, most of the IoT offerings, if it comes to IoT platforms and so on, is a cloud-based solution, which basically eventually will run on an NFV platform.
Will NFV and SDN concepts to enable IoT help CSP get success in that area, do you think? And if so, how?
There are a lot of ways that you can actually address the IoT market. And you don't have to do NFV, obviously. They've been doing this for years without it. But just because something's possible doesn't necessarily make it preferred. And so I think it's really what is the best way to deploy things in an unpredictable market where you don't know what the application of the moment is going to be. And even though a lot of IoT is more enterprise, which is a little bit more predictable, you still do have consumer use cases, which, as we all know, are very unpredictable.
Indeed. Okay. Prodip, you've sat there very patiently up until now. You're going centre stage immediately. A lot's being said about vertical customization of IoT. What does that actually mean? And what do CSPs need the network to look like if they're going to be able to provide and manage IoT services to disparate vertical markets? And there's a lot of emphasis on those vertical markets right now.
Right, so IoT is not something new. We've been talking about it for a while now. It was a buzzword some years ago, and then it sort of died down and it's come back again. And we've been doing, as an industry, we've been doing IoT, supporting the IoT need in many ways in various vertical industries. So I think that's what's been happening. In the past, the addressing IoT was based on individual markets, segments, and building customized platforms for that. The problem with doing that is that the IoT margins are very low. The amount of revenue you get from each of these sessions is very low. So you need a lot of that to make up for the investment you put in there. And if you customize your solution to a special market, now you have an even smaller pie to work with. And I think that is perhaps one of the reasons IoT didn't really pick up, because the incentive for investment was not there. Yes, for some specialized solutions, specialized markets, it was we've been doing it for a while. And I think at this stage, why we think NFV is an enabler is really with these new technologies, SDN, NFV, we're able to introduce some very distinct capabilities into the networks, into the carrier networks, into the service provider networks, which allow us now to build common platforms which you can use to address these different vertical markets. So I think that's where the economics will start to work, that now I can use a common infrastructure and amortize it across all of these markets, but then build a specialization on top where you need it. And where you typically, if you go down to the bottom, the kinds of things you need are pretty much the same. You need to connect to particular devices, you need to collect the data from there, and you need to send it off to some other place. It's not a whole lot you have to do in the IoT things as far as the network goes. But what is special is the kind of how you package the information, where you, the kind of timing you need to send things at, and that's application specific. So the customization really should happen at the policy and application level, and we should be able to use the common virtualization infrastructure, the network control infrastructure to support that. So that's why I think this is a turning point, that we will now really see IoT being monetized. I mean, that's perhaps my point of view.
Ray, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Why did you put the two ball head guys next to each other?
I've not got much. Everybody else has got a lot. Well, no.
Anyway, no. I think it's an important point, and I'd love to hear the CSPs. We have this term in ACG called vertical systems integration, right? And the whole idea is that when you have an area where there's a potential of your value is based on economies of scale, right? Then that becomes a tough value proposition. But one way to accommodate for that is to create these vertical focused solutions, right? Because in those vertical focused solutions, not everybody's in that market, right? And that's where you could develop an end-to-end solution and be able to add value, because you're not competing with everyone on the number of devices. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that, or
If I may just to sort of counter that point. I agree that that's what you can do, but what's been happening is the value has been shifting up.
Right.
So the people who do build these vertical solutions, there is some revenue there, but who's getting the revenue? Not the network providers. It's up there for the people who are building the applications, packaging it all together and doing it. And that's, I think, the challenge for service providers has been, network providers has been, how do I break into that market, because I don't have all of those pieces above.
You bought
I think answering that question and agreeing with Ray. So let's pick an easy one. About 1 million people die every year of food poisoning or falsified medicines, right? It's a real world problem. Globally, there's $370 million of counterfeit drugs. 70 of that is in the US, right? So now we're talking pharmaceuticals, food safety. So to your point of economies of scale, how do we build almost IoT in a box? You pick a segment, you do a lot of research on a problem that has been tried and needs to be solved. And hopefully it's us, but someone needs to solve this, because real people, bad things are happening to people. But then you build a platform, and I think that's been our strategy on the healthcare side with intelligent track and trace. And basically what we did, if anyone's familiar with the serialization component in pharmaceutical, it's a compliance mechanism. It's just simple software that lets you give a unique serial number to medicine. Now it's IoT, so we want to call it a thing. It could be the chair, it could be the monitor. So now if I can serialize down to the lowest common denominator and bring an IoT device, let's just say a temperature, location, moisture sensor, and integrate the two, and be able to go to the manufacturer and tell them, listen, that farm to fork produce, we can tell you that it will be safe from the time it got picked to your distribution center, to the supermarket, to when you bought it is fresh. That drug that was manufactured is in fact legitimate. And when it gets to the pharmacy, the end user is buying the right product. It's a win-win. So in short, for us as a Verizon brand, we're using many of our assets, the network, security, managed services, etc. And through economies of scale, we think we're solving a real world problem, and we'll be profitable.
And trying to do the business case on lives is the value prop, right?
I won't joke about it because we're on camera. But here are the facts. It's a problem that exists at the enterprise level and at the consumer level. And there's been many tries to solve this problem before. We just think that with IoT being the enabler and technologies like NFV to keep it flexible and be there in the case that something unpredictable happens, I think it's the time to do it, and it will be solved. Again, hopefully it's the Verizon brand, but this is something that everyone here will benefit of if we solve, food and medicine deaths and reduce it by 10%. It's a huge win.
Eric,
maybe something to do, because we are solving the world. We are providing some services in Africa. Maybe Orange, you don't know that, but Orange operate a various operation in Africa, and we also try to bring connectivities to everyone. And we had some experience on IoT for people who want to follow their cause and so on. So we had some amazing experiences on it. Just to go back on what we are providing today, so we are not providing only connectivity, also try to provide some tools to help company to collect all their data. And also we try to provide some kind of machine learning solutions to help them to find those let's say some problems that they can face when they collect the data. So we have this kind of tools in our assets also, but we are open also to work with other partners because we can't cover all the requirements of everyone. And for the customization, 5G will arrive with softwareization. All the core network will be software based. So software based means automation. Automation means also personalization. So we believe that with 5G and all the slicing concept, we should be able to instantiate some kind of slice network for specific IoT market, because a sensor that emits maybe one data per day has not the same constraint as some robots that emit a lot of data with some critical bandwidth and latency. So we know that some very different approach between this IoT. And just to come back, we designed the networks for humans for till the 4G. Now I think we should design the network for IoT first, and after the network will be ready to also host devices used by humans.
So I think both points of view you've heard really bear out what I was trying to say, is that using these new technologies allows us to provide differentiation based on the common infrastructure, and that's where you start to get the advantage. So
I'd like to extend it just a wee bit before we move on to another one, which is there's lots of talk about building ecosystems at the moment. What about things like coming up with a notion of, if you're talking about cooperation and transatlantic cooperation, whatever it might be, global cooperation, what about common APIs that all service providers can use together? Is that ever likely to happen? I don't know who wants to respond to it, but given the history of...
I think it's absolutely... Look at 3GPP and ITU. They can come together, and they do and have, to specify hardened, tested interfaces. So I think it's a matter of common shared interests and a realization that a consistent ecosystem that has a stable test platform that they can nest on top of grows the market for everybody. Right. So I think it's all, we already have evidence that it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it's really an important question, because what you don't want to do is be able, from a carrier, is buy a proprietary platform, right? Then you limit your flexibility, because sometimes you're going into areas where you don't know what's going to happen, right? So you need to be able to have that open environment to be able to have the value-added services, be able to constantly differentiate yourself. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in a bad situation there. So it's an important point.
And also, we should design the API to be used by developers, by the most developer we can find on the market, because we need to have this ecosystem. The more developer we have using API we can define all together, better will be the ecosystem.
Okay.
I mean, don't you think there needs to be some standards too with that as well, though, because of some of the, right?
We were talking about this.
Yeah.
There's no.
I was just going to ask you
There's
that.
not a backstage, but
Yeah.
you know, back
Preempting
there,
my question.
Yeah, oh, okay.
Standards.
Standards. There we go.
Whether it's APIs
Right.
or standardizations,
Right.
you know, everyone who's working on delivering on the promise of IoT, every one of us has a customer experience at the end of the equation. So whether it's APIs or standardization, it's about just partnering and partnering earlier. You know, so, you know, 5G comment and Intel. So Verizon's working on a 5G radio standards, and those have been published. Intel has been a hardware partner for a long time, and we have all their OEMs. So how can we make it easier for an OEM whose core competency is not module design? We partner. How do we do it where, and this has happened with, you know, with a competitor on paper where we have a mutual customer and they can deliver that last mile. You know, can we collaborate to ultimately deliver the experience? So between standards and APIs and 5G and you know, a chip, you know, module design, I think we will definitely get there.
Yeah, I think that that's actually a really great point, because there's a meme or a statement in the market right now where you've got the service providers and they're competing with other vendors who are also large infrastructure providers. And the reality is it's very complementary. If you can interact on a standards basis, then it's who has the last mile and then who can build on top of that, and everybody moves faster and the business grows. And you've got the different specialization, whether dealing with data sovereignty would be one specialization, and others may be massive data processing. And so you have a very good opportunity to have a complementary business model in an environment where most people think it's competitive. It's an opportunity to make it collaborative.
Okay. How about this one then? There's an elephant in the room. In fact, in here you get about 10,000 elephants, I would have thought. How do you counter the claims from the big enterprise cloud players? We know who they are, but we'll name and shame a couple of them: GE, Microsoft, SAP, and so on, that they can bypass the CSP entirely and will very soon, if not already, have the ability to deliver everything themselves as an MVNO delivered platform model. That must be a threat to the established order. What do you make of it? Can we talk, Prodip, let's start with you.
Well, it's not a question special to IoT. I mean, this is a question for any service a service provider can provide. And the key thing here is for the service provider to bring the value their network has to the customer. And what is that value? It's not something new. We know that for a long time, that the presence, the reach to the number of customers any service provider has, whether it's mobile or landline. And the second thing is the wealth of information which is living in the network about these customers, about these interactions. And I think if we can find ways to mine this information, connect it with the connectivity, and package it into these, whether it's an IoT service or any other service, this is the way we can clearly differentiate value with respect to the other, relative to the other over-the-top providers, because they don't have that reach. They rely on the network provider to get you that reach. They don't have that detailed information. Yes, we all know that the Googles of the world and others have a lot of information about us. But do they know when you connect it to from that location? That's really what the network has, and can provide histories of those. So I think monetizing all of that, whether it's for better customer experience or better information back to the customer which they can use, I think both of those ways are possible, but that's truly the value I think the network brings.
Lynn, you want to say something?
Yes, so I live in one of the cities that was in theory going to be broadly connected by fiber, and now it turns out that it's much harder than was expected. And I think that there's a message in that it's an opportunity to partner in the various levels of expertise, and especially when you have APIs and easy accessibility to be a partner, which is very important when dealing with some of the cloud companies or some of the enterprise companies. Let them build on top, and then everybody shares value. because it is actually very difficult to deliver a network and do your own fiber, as some companies have learned that will remain unnamed.
You don't need to name.
Yeah, we still also have some advantages. For example, the trust. Some French company will trust French companies to trust the data storage, for example. That's one point. Another point also is maybe the SLA management. How we are able to manage a relationship with some kind of engagement, security, quality of service, and so on. I think we are quite good to provide that to customers, while the OTT are not so good for that. So I think we have some advantages, but we have to be good at the end of the day also, because if we are not good, cost efficient, the margin won't be there, and we will lose money. So